Welcome to the Making Mischief podcast. Here are your hosts, Chris and Heather.
We're back with another episode of Making Mischief podcast.
Yeah, and I think this time we're actually going to talk about the sale of the first figure. Unlike last episode where we said we were going to, but we didn't.
Yeah, we talked about all sorts of stuff in the last episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to go and check out our Instagram for this podcast at, what is it, Mischief Pod?
Making Mischief Pod.
Mischief Pod. I always get it confused.
If we're going to have a podcast,
I can never remember any of that information. I'm sorry. I'm too loopy. My head's all messed up. Okay, so the sale of the very first figure, which included the initiation figure.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, it was the common figure and the initiation figure.
It didn't happen at the same time.
It didn't?
What is wrong with you?
I thought they both were sold at the same time, no?
No.
Oh my god, well then you're about to school me because I don't remember.
January was when we sold first run. April was when we sold initiation.
Wow, there was that big of a time difference?
Do you remember why?
No.
Because you decided to throw us all through a loop and make a coin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so there's a huge saga there.
Yes.
So when we arrived at the middleman's company to pick up all the Gastleys, it was incredible. Yes. I remember sort of putting them in the back of a pickup truck and opening the box, like one of the boxes, to reveal a bunch of the figures inside the one big box. And it was sort of overwhelming because the dream was finally coming to fruition. Like we were actually doing what we set out to do. And in that moment, it was cheerful and fun, but also sheer terror because I wasn't entirely sure that we were going to be able to sell all these figures, you know, instantly or get rid of them all, so to speak, right? Because I thought our house was going to be full of Gastley figures. We were going to be buried in them. We would be sleeping on them. We would be eating dinner on them.
Yeah. So rewind. In case you forgot, we were originally going to get just 100 of our regular Gastley and 50 initiation Gastleys. But as time went on, there was excitement. Lots of people asking us, like, when are you putting these figures out? So we thought, you know what? 100 figures and 50 figures, that might be too low. And then we bumped it up to, I think, like 150 and then 100.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned it on another episode. I don't quite remember. And then finally we came to 150 initiations and then 300 regulars, 200 of which would be first run. So 200 of the common Gastley were first run Gastley, and the difference between the common and first run is that the first run they had like a special 200 piece sticker and they were signed by me, you, and Jacques.
Right, and then they also came with a Gastley head pin.
Yes, I forgot about that as well.
Yeah.
And then the remaining 100 were just sold as common Gastleys, no sticker, no pin.
Right, because the way forward was the red Gastley would be a common figure. Mm-hmm. We would try to have it up on the website on a regular basis so people who found us would have something to purchase.
Yeah.
That would basically open up the door, you know, for them on Mischief Toys.
Yeah, and up until this point, we have not been able to keep him on the website because people just buy them as soon as we put them up.
Yeah. The last time we put up commons, I think they sold out in like 7 minutes or something.
No, it was seconds.
Was it really?
Yes.
The regular red Gastley?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, I thought it was much longer than that. Wow.
No.
Yeah, that's incredible. So back then, which we talked about in earlier episodes when we were coming, you know, trying to put together what the box was going to look like in the figure, the box orientation on the very first figures to include first run Gastley, the first commons, and also initiation, the box was actually wider than it was tall. But now we've changed it where it's taller than it is wide. And the reason for that, as I think we've talked about sort of in detail, when you open the box, Gastley was upright now. But in the past, when you opened the box, he was sideways.
Yes.
So we didn't like that he was sideways when you opened the box. So that was one really big change that we made.
Yeah, it was a huge change that we made.
Yeah, it had to be done because the presentation was just really off. It was weird.
Yeah.
Why is Gastley sideways when you open the box up? He should be upright. So we made that change. So the people who have the original Gastley, first run Gastley, and initiation Gastley, the original commons and initiation Gastley, that version is a version that we will never release again because the box is entirely different.
Well, not only that, but his limbs were made of a more fragile material. And when we first actually brought Gastley's home, they were glued in because we were told by the manufacturer that the original ones that had broken were not glued, but still they had broken. It wasn't like, you know, the arms popped out as if they weren't glued. They like straight up broke. So you had actually thrown a few on the floor.
And I was trying to get them to break.
Yeah, and I remember jumping up and down on them, trying to break them, and they didn't break. So I was like, okay, I think we're in the clear. Like, we can sell these.
Yeah.
So we did. And it was January something. I want to say it was January 9th.
Well, when we picked up the figures, we brought them all home. We stacked them all up in like our living room, dining room area, like kind of like the area can be used as both. And I'm looking at these boxes, you know, stacked up in this room thinking, man, this is a lot of figures to store. Mm-hmm. Like this is going to take a lot of room. So we had a third bedroom at the time with a bed in it, furniture, the whole 9 yards. And we used part of that bedroom as sort of storage for Gastlecast related stuff, Funko Pops that we were going to give away on Patreon and so on and so forth. We just had stacks of stuff. We decided to remove everything out of that bedroom and make it our so-called warehouse. So that is where we now today store all of our figures, in this bedroom in our home. Whereas sometimes if we have an overflow of figures, we'll end up having to put them in the dining room, living room area. So these figures end up sometimes throughout our entire house. Like they're just everywhere. And we actually have, in more recent times, in the next couple months, we're going to have a ton of new manufactured Gastleys come home to us, and I don't know how we're going to store everything because we have plushes coming now too. Mm-hmm. Our house is going to be absolutely filled. But back when this happened, originally, we cleaned out that bedroom. We built it into our warehouse. It didn't seem so bad because we had only the 2 figures. And when you get a figure that's like a, let's say 300 count, how many boxes is that total typically?
There are 48 figures per box, so just over 6. It was like 7 boxes.
Okay, and those
figures.
Those boxes are pretty big.
So with the 200 additional, or the 150 or whatever additional, it was like 10-ish boxes.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of boxes.
Yeah, but it really wasn't that bad because it was only 2 figures.
Not super overwhelming or anything, but in terms of how much space we have in this house, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on.
Well, how much space? So, square footage wise, we have a good sized house. Square footage that we can actually use for storage, it ain't that big.
No.
So, like, we have this area that we don't really, it's more like a storage area, but it's for, like, our personal collectibles, because, you know, the display space that we have is so...
It's minimal.
Yeah, it's very, very little, so we have a lot stored, which we really need to part ways with a lot of that stuff. But it's 2 flights of stairs up, so we can't carry these big boxes and store them up there.
No.
Like, even if we sell all of the stuff that we have in that area, it wouldn't work. We can store like things that we never really use, or like, you know, giveaway sort of stuff up there.
I wouldn't want to have to carry down 10 boxes for all the orders and stuff, because
that would be horrible.
When the time comes and you sell the figure and you put it up, that timetable is it happens so fast, because you put the figure up, and let's talk about putting up, you know, the original first run Gastley.
Yeah.
The first step was we had to sticker all the boxes. Mm-hmm. Once we got them all home, Well, actually, that's not even the first step. First step is pulling all the boxes out, seeing what shape they're in, and finding out how many were damaged in the shipment, because typically you're going to have a handful of damaged figures. You go through all of them, and I remember in that particular order, there was a lot damaged.
Yeah.
Like, especially Initiation. They were destroyed. It looked like somebody had physically stomped on them.
Yeah, so we had to make all that right, but luckily we had a little bit of wiggle room. We still sold the 150 or whatever, and we still sold the 300 we were banking on.
No. I mean, we had enough numbers, but we had to go through all of them. We had to see what was damaged, what wasn't.
There's always some sort of damage in our shipments.
Well,
and
we will get emails from people or messages saying, "Oh my God, there's damage on my box and I want a replacement," and they'll send us a photo and it has a little crease. And I'm like, man, I don't think you guys understand just some of these boxes, how they come in damaged, like really messed up damaged, like almost like holes in them.
In our most recent shipment, I actually had damaged boxes, and luckily they sent us a handful of boxes separate that didn't have figures in them. I was able to replace the boxes right then and there, thank goodness. But the worst damaged boxes you couldn't even open.
Right.
They were it looked like
Scrunched.
someone ran over them. It was crazy.
Like an accordion, basically.
So yeah, we had to go through and make sure, check all the boxes, make sure everything looked good, sticker them, and then it came to signing. So we signed them all, and we hand numbered them, which is something we will never do again, I don't think.
Oh, that was painful.
So for the first run, there were 200. So we did 1 out of 200, 2 out of 200, 3 out of 200. I mean, it was grueling, and I had to make sure I'm not duplicating numbers.
And then once we wrapped the figures and put them in the cardboard box, Heather was then writing on the side of the boxes messages to people.
Oh my God, which I never should have done.
And I was doing it too. So we were writing these handwritten messages. And look, at the very beginning, and when you're putting out your very first figure, it's exciting.
Yes.
You're happy that people are into it. You're happy that you have a following. So we did go all out in that first run.
Yeah, we did. And I feel like, it was sort of a special touch. I think that it was really, really sweet. And I wish I could do that for all orders. But the mistake that we made was doing that, because then you're training your audience. So we were training our audience to expect that in future shipments, they get these messages.
Yeah.
And so we had to untrain them by saying, hey, this was first time, thank you very much, but this isn't a normal thing. So everything that we do, we have to be very careful, because we don't want people to expect things like that, because that takes extra time, and we already take up just packing boxes takes so much time.
Packing boxes, Heather and I will typically, the day of the sale, we'll pack a bunch then, we'll pack a bunch the very next day, and then most likely the third day we'll continue packing and then end up starting to mail out.
Yeah.
And sometimes we mail out in waves. We'll do a big bunch one day and then a big bunch maybe the next. In the most recent ones, we have shipped out pretty much everything within the same day.
With the exception of, I think I put out, for the Tiki Gastley, we had 400 figures. I think I took around 75 to 100 to the post office one day, and then the next day we took the remainder.
Right.
Something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work goes into it, so we can't, it's just hard to do these special touches. So let's get back to how we actually did the sale, because we did early access. For some people, we did early access for first run, and we did early access for initiation. And the people who got early access were people who had purchased our pins in the past.
Oh, right, because we had promised them that from the beginning.
Yeah. So when we were sending out pins, I gathered everyone's email addresses, and because that was something we promised, so I made sure I'm going to put these people within early access. And I had to figure out on Shopify how to do that.
Oh, wow.
Which was incredibly hard. So not only that, but we also promised our patrons early access.
Right.
And that was a whole other level of craziness because, you know, the people who purchased the pins in the past were a set of people. A lot of people purchased multiple pin packs. So realistically, I think for those people, we had like maybe like 40 or 50 people on that list.
Right.
But a lot of those 40 or 50 people were also patrons of the Gastlecast. So they sort of overlapped. So realistically, we didn't have like a crazy amount of people who were in early access.
Well, to be clear, the patrons are Gastlecast YouTube channel patrons.
Yes.
And a lot of those folks joined up, and we would show them like kind of previews, and still do to this day. We'll show previews to our patrons. Sort of, I don't know, they're like our guinea pigs, I guess. Like we bounce ideas off them, we show them things, kind of get an idea of how they're feeling and what their thoughts are. And in reality, back then, when we were getting, you know, money from Patreon, we were dumping that into Mischief Toys.
Yeah.
And so that was helping us sort of grow the business at the time. And we still use some Patreon monies to help Mischief Toys as well. Not as much anymore. But back then it was big. So that's why we offered up the early access to them.
Yeah, because realistically, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the people who purchased the pins and it weren't for our patrons.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, you know, my mistakes in getting a sticker that was too big to put on the initial boxes, and then I had to spend a couple $100 more to buy other stickers, and that wouldn't have been possible without these people, it's just incredible, and we're very grateful. So we wanted to give back in such a way that made sense, and that was with early access. But the problem with early access, and there were a lot of problems with early access, so you have to figure out how it's possible to do on Shopify. And Shopify, so many things are possible, so many things, but you have to find the right apps that will allow it. So I had to search for an app that would allow me to separate groups of people and only allow certain groups of people to do certain things. And I couldn't find it at first.
Right.
So I didn't do that. But the way I got around it, and I had to call Shopify support multiple times, but Shopify has a feature where you can tag people. So I was going in and individually tagging certain customers with their email address. I had to explicitly tell people, if you want early access, you purchased pins from us in the past, you are a patron, you need to sign up for Mischief Toys. You need an account on mischieftoys.com to get early access. I would go in, I would manually tag them with the early access tag, and that would allow me to send a separate email to those people. So I sent an email, I found the dates. January 19th was early access for patrons and people who purchased the pins for the first run. And I sent the email telling them that date and that time. And I also gave them a password to get onto the website. So during the time of the sale, like 5 minutes before, I think, they received an email with the password. They went in at the specific time, typed in the password, and purchased their first run Gastley. But the problem with this was that we didn't allot the full amount of figures. Like, I don't remember the number that we had that were early access, but we didn't put that many figures up for sale on the website.
Okay.
So with Patreon, you know, we told people publicly, like, patrons will get early access. Well, people were joining Patreon, like, up to that day.
Yeah, because they wanted their early access as well.
Yes, and I'm, like, trying to figure all of this out before the drop. And I should have just said, you know, if you join by this date, if you join Patreon by this date, then you get early access. If you don't, then you don't. But I didn't do that. So people were emailing us. I had like 10 or 15 people I had to add that morning.
Wow.
So it was just such, it was too much.
So anyway, you'll never do that again.
I will never do that again. And on top of that, I think that people didn't quite understand when we said, hey, you know, the amount of people who do have early access is higher than the amount of figures that we are putting up for early access.
Right.
And, you know, if you miss it, you have to go the next day. Well, we got a couple of emails where people were upset saying, you know, I joined Patreon specifically so I could get this and I didn't get this. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can't, it was a bit, we had a very proud day that day, but when we got emails like that, it's sort of one of those things where I want to make people happy. And I felt bad that we didn't have enough to go around, but at the same time, we told people we didn't have enough to go around. So I had to remind myself, like, I can't be upset over this. It was a very...
It's frustrating.
Yes, but not in the sense that, like, I'm upset with anybody. It's just frustrating because, you know, I need to make sure to use this as a learning experience and make things incredibly clear in the future. Like, I thought I did, but maybe I didn't make it clear enough. I don't know.
Right.
So, you know, because of that, that's the main reason we don't offer early access to patrons, and now we have something within Mischief Toys where we can offer early access, and we'll get more into that later.
So what we realized with this first drop is that you can't make everybody happy, and you are going to have upset people, and so we've gotten used to that. That's typical, where we do have people that are upset, people who are messaging us directly that they missed it and do we have any extras, you know, a lot of things happen behind the scenes that we don't really talk about, and we have to handle them accordingly because we really don't want to upset anybody or I don't know, we don't want to bum anybody out. I mean, when you miss something, you miss something and it sucks, and we don't want to make it worse for them. But the only thing that we can reply with is, hey, we're sorry, but that's all we've got. I mean, that's it. It's over. Game over.
Well, and realistically, well, we'll get more into that later. So the first drop was very hard. I didn't quite have a good way of inputting patrons and inputting all the early access stuff. Like, it was very manual. It was a lot of work. And it was tough. It was very tough. And the fact that, like, you know, I was adding people the day of, like, literally less than an hour before the drop was just, it was too much. And I'm not putting myself through that again.
And we've got enough work, again, with the packaging and everything else. And, you know, one thing we didn't mention is the added, you don't think about all the costs that go into doing the thing, you know, this whole thing. So you also have to always remember, we have to pack in or add to cost of the figure and everything that we're doing, the packaging material, boxes.
Which is expensive.
The wrapping materials, right?
Just like the shipping on the packaging material is obscene.
Fragile stickers are not cheap.
No.
So all the things that go into it, you know, it's not cheap, and sometimes it really sucks. We get to a point where we're wrapping stuff. This hasn't happened that many times recently, but we'll go through all of our packing material and still have figures we need to wrap up, and we have to order more stuff through Uline and get it out of here like next day, and oh my God, what a disaster. We've run into that a couple of times too, but these are all, I would consider, the growing pains of a company like ours. It's like trying to figure out what works, not overburdening ourselves with things like too much packing material, like what is the right amount to have on hand, also dealing with the amount of space that we have, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and what's annoying is because we sell more than just figures, and sometimes our figures are weird shapes, then we have to get these boxes that are different sizes, and you know, what's the right amount? Like for the gargoyles, for example, we had to get boxes to fit those. We had boxes that fit just one gargoyle, and then boxes that fit the bundle. And it's like, okay, well, we have X amount of gargoyles and X amount of bundles left, but like, are we going to use that many, or are people going to buy more? Like, do we need to get boxes that are bigger that will allow for t-shirts and stuff? Like, how do we do, like, it's just so hard to plan for, and it's always just such a task to just decide how many of each thing we're going to order. Now, luckily, most of our figures are the same size.
Yeah.
Gastley is our bread and butter.
We've done pretty good with that.
Yeah, he is what we keep in stock, and we found a box size that works very well for us. They used to be a little bit bigger, and we found there was more room that wasn't filled in the box that could be like pushed in.
Right.
So in our experience, a box that fits something a bit more snug is a bit better. As weird as that sounds, but
it doesn't have a whole lot of room to jostle around inside that box.
Yeah, so we've had very good luck with more snug boxes. But anyway, sale. So early access happens. It was a hard time, like, figuring out how to do this. And we did the password on the website, which realistically someone could have given to their friend and said, hey, I know you're not early access, but go get yours. This is the password. Nobody did that.
That's
I went
awesome.
in. Yeah, that made me feel so good because it means that our audience can be trusted. Now, the more we grow, that might not be the case, but that made me feel so good that there wasn't one person who like snuck around that rule.
Right.
It was really cool.
I agree.
But I needed to figure out a way to not send out a password 5 or 10 minutes before the drop, because email is finicky. Someone might get an email at this time, but then the next person might get it a couple minutes later when it's too late. So, I have figured that out, and I will get into that deeper in another episode. But for the early access, they sold like that. And then outside of early access the next day, which was January 20th, they sold like that.
Yeah, so they sold out in seconds.
Less than a minute, both of them.
Yeah, they went really, really fast. And for us, that was huge because we didn't know.
It was such a good feeling.
We didn't know what was going to end up happening, if people were really into the idea or not. And we had a small audience who were sort of into Gastley and Mischief toys, right? It was such a new thing. Like nowadays, there are a lot more people out there that know about it, that are aware. But back then, when we first started the whole thing, a little over a year ago, people weren't really aware. Not everybody watches Gastlecast in the Funko community. One thing that we did do that I thought would be a smart tactic for us in terms of marketing, because our marketing platform on YouTube is pretty great. Gastlecast putting out videos every single day. We can mention Mischief toys and kind of get people on board. But I thought, why not hit larger marketing, avenues by sending to YouTubers? And I remember Top Pops ended up taking one.
Yep.
Dr. Applesauce. Wasatch. Who else? We had a couple others in there. Bearded Pop Hunter.
Yes, BPH
He took one.
had one.
And there were Greg.
Yes.
Yeah. So we had a whole handful of people who ended up taking on the Gastley and showing it on their channel, showing excitement for it. It was really big. And these guys have big audiences as well. So having Gastley sort of show up on their channel was a huge deal for us because, again, it got the name out there. Not everybody's going to watch their content and say, oh my God, I love Gastley and I'm going to start collecting them. But at least it got the name out. And that's sort of what our trajectory was.
And
right?
It was so cool because everyone we reach out to. Now, luckily, we do have a relationship with all of these people. They have always been very kind to us. And we've always talked to them. It might not be every day, but we do have good relationships with these people. But just the fact that they took them and did that was just such a huge compliment, because realistically, like if something doesn't fit on your channel, because most of these people are Funko centric people with the exception of Greg.
Yeah.
They could say no and it wouldn't hurt our feelings. We would just say, okay, that's fine. Like, we get it. Because if someone wanted to send us something, but it's like a basketball hoop, like, what are we going to do with that on our channel? We would say, no, we don't want to show off your basketball hoop. We show off Funko Pops.
Well, the cool thing about it is that some of those channels sort of laced it in with their other content. So they're talking about Funko stuff, and then at some point they're like, oh, here's Gastley, and this is from Mischief Toys, and this is Gastlecast, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The one thing I do regret in all that is that I didn't send sort of a piece of paper stating, these are the things that we want you to mention, but you don't have to read the letter.
Well, what was really cool though? No, we sort of did.
Did we?
Yeah, but it wasn't like.
I feel like I didn't do it. I feel like I didn't implement that the proper way.
We more so talked to them and thanked them. Right. And we told them a little bit about Gastley, but a lot of, like, when you receive something that somebody wants you to specifically, like, show off in a video, typically they have bullet points that they want you to mention. But in my opinion, it was really cool seeing what they did with it because, you know, some of them discovered things and realized things that others didn't, or that we thought, you know, might not stand out to people. So it was just really cool to see everybody's different interpretation of Gastley.
Yeah.
So I think we did that just before our first sale, if I remember correctly.
I believe so. I believe that went out first, and then eventually he came out in the sale.
Yeah,
we did
the sale.
Which I thought was a pretty good way of doing it, because it kind of got the word out that maybe people would come and check out Mischief Toys. And I believe we got a pretty good handful of people signing up for the newsletter through all of that.
We did.
Checking us out. So big shout out to all the YouTubers out there, friends of ours, who took a Gastley on and showed it on their channel. It means a lot to us that they did that. And that isn't the last time we'll do that. We'll most likely do stuff like that moving on into the future. I think it's a smart way of doing things. It gets Gastley and Mischief Toys out there a little bit more. And I think that's really great marketing. I mean, because basically they're all speaking to the same sort of fan base that we speak to every single day.
Yeah, and you know, every YouTube channel has a different fan base. And I find it really interesting because everyone has like their own flavor. You know, there's people who are like mystery box centric, and people who do like toy hunts, and people who just show figures off on their channel, and then people like us, the Gastlecast on YouTube, we talk a lot of news stuff, or, you know, we do some reviews. We'll show pops or sodas sometimes, but a lot of it is centered around news or just like wacky things that we choose to do, or things that are going on in the community. So everyone attracts a different audience.
Yeah.
So getting Gastley in front of all these different audiences was really cool too.
It was cool. We may do the same thing with our upcoming character, Demonstro.
Yes.
And Demonstro is the villain to Gastley, and we'll talk more about him in the future, because Demonstro is a very interesting concept, and it went through a lot of changes.
A lot.
The idea of the whole idea of Demonstro, what started off as something entirely different and has become something, a whole other thing now.
Down to the name.
Down to the name, yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. The name. But the selling of Gastley, the first round, was really incredible, and we weren't sure if the buck stopped there. We put out the Gastley, and common Gastley and first run Gastley are people like, okay, this is great. We supported Gastlecast. We supported Mischief Toys. We're out. See you later. Bye. Yeah. We didn't know if we actually sort of became a staple in the world of collecting, right? We didn't know if we were a part of the designer toy sort of captured window, right?
Yeah.
We're up there with some of the big guys, the bigger names. Are we really in there yet? Or how long is it going to take us to get in there?
Well, I think a lot of people initially didn't realize that we were trying to make this a thing. And honestly, like, it took me a long time to realize that this was going to be a thing. Like, I thought we were just going to do Gastley and an initiation, and that's it. But then we made plans for 2 other figures.
Yeah, we made plans for 2 other figures, but even greater than that is the idea of Initiation Gastley being larger than just a black version of Gastley with red eyes. It became an experience.
Yes, which was insane. And another point in time where I realized your brilliance, but I also hated you for it.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Big time.
I know. It's annoying, but I I will say that, we want to be bigger than a toy company. We want to be bigger than a designer toy company. We want to be bigger than, a lot of these other companies, and which they all do their own thing and they all do cool stuff. But our idea is to give you an experience past the vinyl toy. Things that are laced inside your boxes, stories that you find that we post on social media, cartoons or stop motion videos, or just anything where we're explaining to you these upcoming really bizarre, mysterious sort of things, you being sort of dragged into being a part of a cult that's within a toy company. We want to be able to implement all these really wacky and experimental ideas and grow Mischief Toys larger than life. When you think of Mischief Toys, I don't want you to think of Heather and I sitting before you talking on a podcast. I want you to think that it's this culmination of just a world, a whole world. And we're growing that world piece by piece. And one of the biggest things that we ever did was pack in a very special item with our Initiation Gastley.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that item, Initiation Gastley, and his sale in the next episode, because that story is a really crazy one, and I cannot believe we even figured it out. The item...
No, not even that. I can't believe we are still married to this day after that.
Well, I can't believe that the special item that we came up with to come with Initiation Gastley even came to fruition.
Yeah.
And I'll point out that it didn't come out the way that I actually wanted it to. I consider it one of my many failures in Mischief Toys. But we'll talk about that again in a future episode. Next episode, actually, we'll talk all about Initiation Gastley. But guys, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Making Mischief podcast. I am loving making this podcast.
Making this podcast.
Yeah, I know. I'm so excited. I can't speak. But I love making this podcast. I love being able to tell our story. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I am looking forward to listening to this in like a year's time and listening to every episode and just remembering a lot of these things, because as we talked in the last couple episodes, there are bits and pieces I do not remember. As an example, I forgot that Common Gastley, First Run Gastley was not sold with Initiation. I totally forgot that. I really did. I totally forgot. So I'm learning along with you in this podcast. So go and check out MischiefToys.com. Sign up for our newsletter there. Also, go to Making Mischief Pod on Instagram.
You got it right.
And Making Mischief on Instagram as well.
Making Mischief? Oh my gosh.
Oh no, I already screwed up. Mischief
I gave
Toys,
you a high five.
Mischief Toys on Instagram. I'm sorry, Mischief Toys, at Mischief Toys, and at Making Mischief Pod. So those are the two Instagrams you want to go and follow. Check them out.
Leave us a review.
Yep, leave us a review,
please. Follow
please.
us wherever you're listening to us. Give us a like if you're watching us on YouTube. Help spread the word of this podcast, because we think it is so interesting, so much fun, and everybody should hear about it. Anybody who's interested in toys should be interested in it, I think. Or anybody who is even interested in just like interesting things.
Or starting a business, I think, too.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of what we talk about in this podcast sort of helps those who are trying to start their own business, no matter what it is, and realizing that there are so many extra steps that you're not aware of. They were stumbling blocks for us, but we ended up figuring it out down the road. And so now I feel like we're a well-oiled machine, considering we've only been doing this for a year.
No, we're not. We had a really major mess up a couple days ago.
We did, but a well-oiled machine in comparison to where we were in January of 2022. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, guys, pass this along to your friends, review us, do all the things, and we will see you next week.
Guys, remember to make mischief!
Keep current with Mischief Toys by following at Mischief Toys on Instagram and by joining our newsletter on MischiefToys.com. Thank you for listening to the Making Mischief podcast, and remember to make mischief.